Well, a warm welcome along to the Assist, sponsored by Free Super Tips. I'm Warren Ashurst, and once again alongside me this week are Mark Langdon and Dan Childs. We're back after the international break and plenty of Premier League action and EFL action to look forward to over the course of the weekend. But guys, we can't start anywhere else other than with the appointment of the new England manager. Mark, we'll start with you. Your initial thoughts on Thomas Tuchel?
I think in terms of Tuchel coming in, depends what way you want to look at it. Look, I think he's better than Gareth Southgate, so I think England have got a better chance of winning a World Cup now than they did sort of at the, during Southgate's tenure. He's better than Lee Carsley. He's better than kind of the English options that were out there. My own personal belief, however, is that the England national team manager should be English. Otherwise, what's the point of international football if it's not your best against their best? And I don't wish that to sound. The Daily Mail had a sort of shocking back page, didn't they, earlier on in the week about sort of dark day for English football, and because it's nothing to do with Tuchel being German. That to me is not part of this. I just think if you're England, if you've got kind of the depth that we've got to our club football, the money that is swirling around the English game, might never been European champions, of course, but knocking on the door and would be seen as one of Europe's sort of bigger nations. I think it's not the right thing. And while Potter or Eddie Howe wouldn't have been as good an appointment as Thomas Tuchel from a purely chance of winning the World Cup, I quite strongly believe that the English manager should be English.
Dan, do you think they've gone with him because of his ability to win sort of high-profile matches?
Yeah, I mean, it just is. He's in general, he's a winner, isn't he? You look at he's been at some big clubs, but in the last 6 years, he's got 2 French league titles, a Champions League, a Bundesliga. There's a hell of a CV there. I just think just briefly on the, I'm looking at people saying about how do we develop English coaches and that, with the St George's Park, strategy. But I just think, what is the England team for? Is it to develop, our coaches, or is it to try and win the game's biggest prizes? And I just think he's a very, very good choice for the job. I'm looking at previously under Southgate, that I think there was a need for a change. His record on paper looks great, but we had a hell of a lot of soft draws in the big games that really mattered in the Euros 2020 final and the Euros final this year, and even in the World Cup semi-final against Croatia, we were really poor and come up short and were well beaten. So I just think I think the England team's crying out for a manager. He's adaptable. His team's playing different ways, but generally there's an intensity to the way they play, and there was very little intensity about the way that England played at the Euros this summer. So I'm looking forward to the team playing with that, more of an identity, if you like. He's got a fantastic group of players to work with, and I think that every chance that England will do better under him.
And of course, the big match this weekend in the Premier League involves Thomas Tuchel's old club, Chelsea, as they make the journey to Anfield to take on Liverpool on Sunday. Well, time to look at that big match now. It is a 4:30 kickoff on Merseyside as Liverpool take on Chelsea. Liverpool around 13-20 to claim the victory. It's 31-10 the draw, and as big as 4-1 Chelsea for the victory. Mark, we'll start with you. In terms, we mentioned this a couple of times, of course, over the last few weeks about Liverpool's comfortable fixture list, shall we say, since the start of the season. But I suppose they can only beat what's put in front of them. But this looks like being their biggest test to date.
Yeah, I would have thought so. Obviously, the hardest game, and sort of use that inverted commas on paper, so far has been the trip to Old Trafford, and that they were able to negotiate that very comfortably. But they have played a lot of teams that they would have expected to beat. If these games would have been spread out throughout the season, I think you expect to beat Bournemouth and Brentford at home, Wolves and Crystal Palace away. They're sort of tricky away games, but it's not like going to, say, a Newcastle, is it, or Tottenham, Aston Villa. It's just below that kind of, the elite level sort of hard away games. But you're right, Warren, you can only beat what's been put in front of you. They've done that very well. They're top of the Premier League. They've done, started very comfortably in Europe as well. Again, I'm not sure what the calibre of opponent's been like in that competition either. But still, to go to San Siro and beat Milan the way they did, having conceded first, does bode well for Arne Slot and his team. I think this is a really interesting game, though, because a big test for both sides, really. I think Chelsea have shown bits that they are, at certain times that they look like they could be a good side. They've also shown that they're very much a work in progress. So I think it's a big game, for both teams really to see where they're at.
Yeah, we mentioned right at the start of the season, Dan, that nobody knew what to expect from Chelsea. I think Enzo Maresca was included in that as well. But they are starting to show signs now that they're going in the right direction.
There's improvement there, but it's sort of bumpy, isn't it? They'll throw in a performance at Wolves where they go and win, 6-2, and then you've got the one that the last fixture, the draw against Palace and the draw against Nottingham Forest, the 1-1 when they've played against 10 men towards the end, and over the game they've given up 16 shots, which to me would be a bit of a concern. I know Forest are improving, but I think they are going to certainly finish higher and get a higher points tally than last season. And Liverpool, as you mentioned, the test is going to come now. Between now and the next break, they've got league games against Arsenal, Brighton, and Aston Villa, as well as the game against Chelsea. So be interesting to see what happens. Don't forget, Liverpool going to Anfield is always tough. They got 48 points at home last season, which is more than any other team in the division. So any team going to Anfield, they face a tough game.
With all that said, Mark, what's your best bet for Sunday's big game?
I'm going to go for Liverpool to win and over 2.5 goals. I can, see it being quite a high-scoring game. Chelsea only failed to score against Man City, of course, on the opening weekend, and they did create chances in that game. Liverpool have been very strong defensively so far, but I mean, this is the best attack that they've played this season, and it's worth, of course, remembering that Alisson, the goalkeeper, is out for Liverpool, and Kelleher. He's not the worst deputy in the world, but he's certainly no Alisson either. And
Dan, you expecting goals on Sunday?
Yeah, I've got a similar type of expectation. I'm going to go with Liverpool and both teams to score. I mean, Chelsea, as Mark's mentioned, they are a threat going forward. They've scored since the City game. They've scored in the last 10 games in all competitions, and I can see them scoring here. But I worry about Chelsea defensively. I mentioned the game against Nottingham Forest. Since then, they've got to make 2 enforced changes. You've got Fofana and Cucurella both suspended, so that's not ideal when you're going to Anfield. I think be plenty of goals. I think Liverpool will get more of them. So Liverpool and both teams to score.
So just a reminder, the big game of the weekend in the Premier League, Liverpool against Chelsea, is a 4:30 kickoff on Sunday. Time to look ahead now to the rest of the games in the top flight. Well, time to look ahead now to the rest of the Premier League action, and the Saturday games get underway with an afternoon kickoff at 12:30. You have to go back to 2011 for the last time there was a goalless draw between Tottenham and West Ham, and well, both teams suggest that they're going to be goals this season with what we've seen of them so far. In terms of the betting, Tottenham around about 12-25, the draw 4-1, and West Ham 9-2. Dan, we'll start with you with this one. It's difficult to know with these lunchtime kickoffs sometimes. You sometimes get a crazy game with loads of goals. You might get a game where it almost looks like the two teams are half asleep for an early kickoff. And coming back from the international break as well is another vagary to consider here.
Yeah, and it's difficult to know whether the break is a benefit or not for Spurs. I mean, in some ways, after that debacle in the second half against Brighton, maybe you don't want to have 2 weeks to sort of stew on that. But in other ways, it gives Ange plenty of time to look at what's gone wrong and maybe clear the heads and come back stronger next time. I was, as a Spurs fan, I was completely in despair of that second half against Brighton. But you have got to, I suppose, remember that there was 5.5, decent games going into it. They'd won 5 games on the trot, before that match in all competitions, and a decent first half. I think they'll come again here, and I fancy them to win this game. I think West Ham through the season are going to improve. They're already showing that, the 4-1 against Ipswich, but I do think they're a bit more of an attacking team than they were under Moyes. When David Moyes was in charge, they would play with a very low block against Spurs. Might be hard to break down. I think this will be a little bit more open. It will suit Spurs. So that leads into my tip. I think Spurs will win a high-scoring game, Tottenham, and over 2.5 goals.
I suppose patience is something that's just not that allowed to managers very much these days, Mark, in terms of both the fans and the boards. But, these are two managers who are looking to try and build something at both teams. And because of that, you are going to get some inconsistency at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's more excuse, obviously, for West Ham because Lopetegui has just gone in. And this is sort of Postecoglou's second season, but they've got quite a lot of young players, so maybe that's the jump around in inconsistency so far. Tottenham are second in the Premier League on expected goals at the moment, but I just sort of sense a vulnerability sort of to them that West Ham might be able to play upon. I think Spurs, 2's on, something like that. I can easily avoid them. So I'm going to go for West Ham or draw double chance. Also, Romero, very key defender for Spurs, would have been playing for in those sort of World Cup qualifiers and a long trek back for that early game. So that might just hinder them defensively even more.
Well, let's head into the 3 o'clock kickoffs now, and we'll stick in the capital, firstly, because Fulham play host to Aston Villa. Fulham 29-20, the draw 5-2, and it's 9-5 Aston Villa. The more I see of Fulham, Mark, the more I'm impressed with how they're playing, sort of style that they've got, and the additions that they've made as well this summer.
Yeah, well, the Racing Post royalty, David Jennings, on the horse racing team, was in the London office on Wednesday. I was chatting to him. He was suggesting Marco Silva for Manchester United. He was raving about him, saying most underrated manager in the league by a distance. He's definitely doing a good job at Fulham. I think a lot of people, myself included, expected them to maybe go backwards after losing Paulinho, but they're playing some really good stuff at the moment. What I am going to do, though, is go for the draw in this game. Aston Villa have got some injuries, but they have only lost to Arsenal so far this season. You could argue about the sort of the softness of their schedule as well, because they've played a lot of teams that are hanging around the bottom third of the table at the moment. But I wouldn't be surprised if this one finished all square.
You could say, Dan, that this is the time of the season where this Champions League campaign and then off the international break could be a time when Villa are going to be stretched. Is this a tough game for them, do you think?
Yeah, possibly. It may happen at some point. This is certainly a tough game for them. I think both coaches, I think, are two of the best coaches in the league. Mark's mentioned Marco Silva. I think Unai Emery is a fantastic coach as well, and could be maybe destined for an even bigger job than Aston Villa further down the line. I just think, looking at the prices, I've been impressed by Fulham, but Villa are outsiders here at 9-5. I think a lot of games are won by certainly by two well-coached teams, won by what you've got in the final third. I look at Villa, with Ollie Watkins and Duran, to come off the bench. I just think that they've got the edge in that area, so I'm going to go with Villa to win the game.
John Duran, of course, signed a new contract during the international break to keep him at Villa Park. Let's turn our attentions now to the game at Portman Road. Another of the 3 o'clock kickoffs on Saturday is Ipswich take on Everton. Ipswich 7-5, the draw 23-10, Everton 2-1. Have Everton turned the corner now? Dan, do we think they're going to pull away from the bottom three?
I think they have. What I would say, I fancied them. I think when we were drawing no bet against, for them against Newcastle last time, it was a 0-0. I think I was a bit lucky actually. I think that Everton had a few more, as it turned out, a few more injuries than were expected going into the game, and didn't play that well. They're probably happy to get a 0-0 draw in the end. But results have started to turn now. I think that's 3 unbeaten now for Everton, so the pressure's kind of lifting a little bit for them. And they've still got a few players that are doubts or could be out, but I just think that they're likely winners here. I think they're odds against, draw no bet. Ipswich, I think that West Ham result, they took the lead early on and then got beat 4-1. I think that's a little bit of a reality check for them. I still think that out of the 3 newly promoted teams, they're the most likely to survive. But no, I just think this is a bit of pressure on them now after that result. And I think Everton, may seize on that and nick the points.
I know we're only sort of mid-October, Mark, but it already had a bit of a look of a must-win this for Ipswich.
But I know what you're saying, Warren, because you don't want to be getting sort of the run to go too much sort of longer before you're still waiting for that first Premier League win, and once you get one win, you hope that wins beget more wins. But what I would say is that they're still very much in touch with the rest of the teams down there, it's not like they're already stranded. And I actually thought that this was a good opportunity for Ipswich to get that first win. I think that they are going to be much better at Portman Road than they are on their travel. So I'll forgive them the sort of West Ham horror show. There are a few defensive errors in there. At home, we've just spoken about how good sort of Fulham and Villa have started this season, and Ipswich have drawn with both of those at Portman Road. I think Everton are a dip down on that calibre of opponent. If they put in the same kind of performance, I think they've got a good chance of getting that elusive win.
Okay, well, we're going to turn to the game at Old Trafford now, and if he was an animal, Erik ten Hag, he might be well be a cat, because I think we may well have used up about 4 or 5 lives so far this season. Every time we get to an international break, it seems to just ramp up the talk of him potentially leaving, but he's still there. And United are 7-10 to beat Brentford at home on Saturday. It's 16-5 the draw and 7-2 Brentford. Are we going to get another early goal here, Mark?
Well, we might do. Just Brentford, just remarkable sequence of early goals. They're starting matches so fast. But just going back to Ten Hag, I mean, he's managed to get another life, Warren, because Thomas Tuchel would have been the most likely person. He was the favourite to become the next Manchester United manager. He's now sort of not going to be that, having become England manager. So he would have definitely been celebrating sort of Tuchel's appointment there. And yeah, I'm not sure they'll ever get rid of him. He might last as long as Fergie at this rate, just winning a League Cup, FA Cup here and there, and just bobbing along. I was astonished with the team selection. It kind of worked because they weren't that bad at Aston Villa before the international break. But when you spend the amount of money they have and you choose to go with Harry Maguire and Johnny Evans as your 2 centre-halves for a game, I mean, it was a statement team selection. He'll say it worked because they got the 0-0. I thought Aston Villa were really leggy after the game against Bayern in midweek. But I couldn't massively fancy Man United here. The market, though, does just hate Manchester United. So I find it difficult to get sort of value against them. But what I was looking at, alluding to what you mentioned earlier on, Brian Mbeumo to score the first goal each way, around about 8-1. He's scored in 5 games this season. 4 of them have been the opening goal of the game. And yeah, he's a big threat. So yeah, I'm not sure United will keep a clean sheet. If they don't, he's the man most likely for Brentford.
Well, Sir Alex Ferguson's been told this week that they're ending his ambassadorial role at Old Trafford, and yet Erik ten Hag is still there down at the moment, and he will see this game, you would think, as a game that they have to win, really, just to try and at least take a little bit of the pressure off him and the players.
I think so. This will be, even with the Tuchel getting the England job, I just think that there's only so much that the United fans have actually been broadly supportive of him, and if that changes, which could well do with maybe a failure to defeat Brentford, then I think his days really would be numbered, even if it meant maybe Van Nistelrooy coming in as a temporary interim manager. But I think because the Villa game, I think they went to there and he thought it's a must not lose. This one, I think it's a must win. So I think there'll be more positive and attacking in this game. They have got a lot of injuries, but they have got quite a few. A lot of their better attacking players are available now. So I can see a bit of a basketball match, if you like, an exciting game with goal, plenty of goals. Brentford have shown that they're a big threat, especially in the early part of games. Got the 5-3 against Wolves last time out, but they have looked vulnerable, Brentford, defensively, more so than the last couple of seasons under Thomas Frank. So I think that will continue, and Man United, I think, will just get a win to save Ten Hag for another weekend. Man United and both teams to score, I'm going to go for.
It's an intriguing game at St James's Park at 3:00 on Saturday. Newcastle against Brighton. Newcastle 19-20, the draw 27-10, and Brighton 13-5. Dan, I just wonder whether this appointment of Thomas Tuchel for England this week might just take a little bit of the heat off Eddie Howe.
Possibly. I mean, was he ever right at the front of the queue for the England job? I'm not sure. He was talked about quite a bit, but and there's even the debate of whether he would have wanted to take it. I mean, Newcastle is a very, very big Premier League job these days. So I just think, looking at this game, Newcastle, as I mentioned, were playing against an injury-hit Everton last time, so they probably edged it with a better side, but I'm still not completely sold on them. Isak could be back, so that could make a big difference for them, but you look at their XG4 is 14th, their XG against is the 8th highest. They're not faring, great on either of those metrics, and points-wise, they're doing okay, but you're not going to carry on performing, ordinarily and keep piling up the points. Brighton mixed against Spurs, poor first half, very good in the second, but I generally like them as a team. I think they'll get at least a point here. So Brighton or draw, double chance.
Big old journey, Mark, for those Brighton fans going up to Tyneside on Saturday. Are they going to come back with anything to celebrate?
Yeah, I mean, a black market bet here because Chelsea wants to lay Newcastle. I fancy them to win. I just think with Newcastle, where they are strong is at St James's Park. I think that's clear. Already beaten Spurs, have already beaten Southampton, played reasonably well against Man City for the draw. It's one of their better performances of the campaign. I also think they've got the players suited here to beat Brighton. I look at like Gordon and Barnes and Isak, and you just see runners from deep against that high Brighton line. And I mean that combined, Brighton conceded 9 goals in their last 3 Premier League matches. I think it's hard to win too many games when you concede in that amount of goals. I'll go for Newcastle.
Okay, well, we'll turn to the final of the 5 at 3 o'clock kickoffs on Saturday now, and it's at St Mary's where Southampton take on Leicester. This game always brings back memories of a 9-0 scoreline in favour of the visitors. Will it be as one-sided this time? Southampton 13-10 to claim the victory. It's 5-2 the draw. Leicester 2-1. And after a really shaky start at the Emirates, I was watching that game, Mark, against Arsenal before the international break. Thought actually Southampton showed some good signs, and they're going to have to try and build on that in what looks like a big game for them at the bottom end of the table. Yeah,
because they've already had what looked like winnable home games sort of on paper, haven't they? Ipswich and Nottingham Forest are playing better maybe than what we thought sort of at the start of the season. But still, I think when Russell Martin was looking down the list of fixtures there, and it definitely will be thinking the same against Leicester. I think they are good in parts. It's just whether they can put it together for 90 minutes. I'm going to go for the draw in this game. Leicester have already had 3 draws. They lost a couple of games 2-1 as well. So, been some really close matches as far as they're concerned. And they did nearly have a point at Arsenal as well. So I found this one sort of difficult to separate the sides.
Leicester, of course, first win under their belt. Dan, is that going to kick them on now, or do we think this is a tricky looking away day?
I think it'll be a tight game. Not a lot to choose between the teams, but yes, I'm going to go for Leicester on the draw no bet. I think they're the likelier winners. Southampton, seem to have played better sometimes against the bigger teams. They were playing well against Newcastle before Newcastle went down to 10 men. Played well, as you mentioned, against Arsenal, but against the teams around them, I mean, they would think might be around them. Nottingham Forest, Ipswich, Bournemouth, watching them games, and they've really not risen to those occasions. You're just looking at the statistics. 1 point, fewest goals scored in the league. Still look open at the back, conceding a lot of goals. Leicester look like they're adapting better. Got a big win against Bournemouth and a clean sheet. I just think they'll kick on from that, and they're the more likely team to win the game.
Saturday's late game in the Premier League sees Bournemouth up against Arsenal. Bournemouth as big as 4-1 to claim the points against the Gunners, who are 4-6, and the draw 29-10. Dan, I suppose with Arsenal, there's been a few question marks recently. Are they as potent going forward as they have been before? But they've had teams probably with a low block and have made it difficult for them. That's probably not going to be the case against Bournemouth, who like to have a go.
No, that's true. I mean, they're very weak in the market here. Actually, Arsenal. I mean, I think that 4-6 to me, I would snap your hands off for it. I know they've got a few injuries. Arsenal. I mean, unsure about how many of them will be out. Saka may actually well be fit and come back in and play. Even if the worst case scenario, you've still got Raheem Sterling, Gabriel Jesus, Leandro Trossard, 3 players that will walk into Bournemouth's side. Bournemouth, as you mentioned, very attack-minded. They'll have a go. I just think that may suit Arsenal. Arsenal have got a really, really strong defence and certainly carry enough threats, going forward. So Arsenal to win for me. Have you got a similar opinion, Mark? Do you fancy Arsenal here?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was sort of thinking it'd be closer to 2s on, probably. I think that, Arsenal... It feels a bit strange to feel like they're being disrespected, seeing as they're the Premier League title favourites. I think if you're Premier League sort of, favourites to win the Premier League. I think it should be shorter than 4-6 to win at Bournemouth away win.
Okay, well, we'll go on to Sunday's other fixture now. Of course, we've already talked about Liverpool, Chelsea at 4:30, but the 2 o'clock kickoff is at Molineux. Wolves against Manchester City. The home side 13-2, City 3-1 on, and it's 5-1 the draw. And Mark, if you're a team like Wolves and you've been booed off the pitch in your game before the international break, a home game with Manchester City is not necessarily something to look forward to.
It's not. Normally Man City is a free hit, and actually Wolves have done okay against Man City. Sort of, certainly given the budgets of the two teams, they've made it awkward at times. That they've claimed wins over them, but I'm not sure that they're in the right shape to sort of do it this time around. I'm going to go for Man City to win and both teams to score. The reason for that is that Man City. Yeah, I expect them to win the game, but do I fancy them to keep a clean sheet? Not really. Conceded 8 goals, which is the same as Manchester United, and everyone says that United are absolutely hopeless. And their defensive expected goals, so the expected goals against, is sort of 0.2 worse than Tottenham, and we know that Spurs are absolutely wide open. So they are giving up opportunities, but I expect them to beat Wolves, probably 3-1, 4-1, something like that.
Are we looking down here at the last throws of Gary O'Neill? Or, we said about patience earlier on. He did such a good job last season, but it can change very quickly.
It can. I hope he gets more time. I mean, their start of the season has been absolutely brutal, isn't it? I mean, they've had 5 of their 7 matches against teams that finished in the top 7 last season. That is a hell of a tough start. He did look dejected after the last game, because the game at Brentford, they would go there looking and thinking there's a good chance of getting a point or 3, and they played poorly, lost 5-3, and he seemed very downcast after that. But they had a tough summer as well, didn't they? Losing Kilman and Neto, just conceding too many goals, averaging 3 goals conceded every game. I agree with Mark. I think they may score against Manchester City, who play a high line, and they're quite open at the back. But City are just going to have too much firepower. So similar train of thought to Mark. I'm going to go Manchester City and over 2.5 goals.
Well, we've got a Monday night football to look forward to this week. It is Nottingham Forest against Crystal Palace at the City Ground. Forest 13-10, the draw 5-2, and Palace 2-1. The prices would suggest, Dan, that this is a wide open affair. And how do you see it going?
I'm not sure. It'll be quite a close affair, I suppose. But Forest, the price really appeals to me. Odds against at home, I think they've shown themselves to be certainly a better team than Crystal Palace so far this season. And I would have it up there with Arsenal as one of your best sort of single bets of the weekend. I mean, the game at Chelsea have been playing really well. They got a deserved 1-1 draw in the end with the chances that they created. 16 shots, they had 9 shots on target. I mean, that is good going for a team and a manager that's seen as a defensive manager, Nuno, but they are creating opportunities and causing problems for teams. I just think Palace have had a really, really poor start to the season, haven't they? Struggling at the moment, no wins, under a lot of pressure, and I think Forest will take advantage of that.
Yeah, I was reading the other week that there was speculation over Mateta's future and contract wranglings going on there, which obviously wouldn't help behind the scenes, Mark. Is this going to be more frustration for Palace?
Yeah, I think it will. I think you can make a case here that Nottingham Forest are at least as good as Crystal Palace. And if they are, normally with home advantage, two teams very similar ability, you'd be expecting sort of a price of around about 11-10, and you're getting 7-5. Nottingham Forest. Me and Dan sounds like we're quite strong really on Forest and Arsenal. So if you're looking for a Premier League double this weekend and you're kind of looking to follow us too, that might be the double to have.
That is the Premier League ticked off then for this week. Up next, we'll look at the EFL. Well, the match in focus in the EFL this week is in the Championship, something of a local derby as Luton prepare to take on Watford in an early kick-off at a 12:30 start at Kenilworth Road. We'll look at the prices in a moment or so's time, but no love lost between these two sides, Dan. And it looks like a big game for both of them, really, for differing reasons.
Big game for both teams. I mean, I go to Watford season ticket, with my son, so I see a lot of Watford. Going to go with under 2.5 goals. This is not a way of fence sitting and avoiding taking the flak for going either way. But I just think this is a game. Anyone that follows Watford and Luton, that it's a game that the first thing you do is you don't lose. Both teams, there's no love lost between the clubs, and Luton have been quite poor at the start of the season. I think teams that often come down from the Premier League, they come down with a lot of what you would say are Premier League players, and a lot of investment has gone into the playing squad. I think Luton have saved a lot of the cash that they've made to go into the new stadium that they're building. So it's a bit of an unusual scenario, and that's probably the reason why they're one of the big reasons why they're struggling at the moment. They've the games away to Plymouth that I watched on TV, they lost 3-1, could have no complaints over the result. Were well beaten 2-0 at Sheffield United last time out. But do I fancy Watford to go there and win? Not so sure, because they're struggling away from home. Although they're 6th in the league, they've lost 3 or 4 away games, lost 3-0 away to Preston last road trip. So I'm not convinced, they'll get the result either. So what I do see is a tight game, and unders odds against looks the way to go.
And Dan, just quickly, sorry, Warren, just in terms of Watford, I think I'm surprised they're sort of in the top 6 at the moment. Do you expect them to kind of finish around those positions, or are they likely to drop back?
No, I don't think they'll finish in the top 6. I think top 10 best for Watford. They've won some big games at home where they've maybe have been a little bit fortunate to win them at home to Sunderland, at home to Middlesbrough. Lacking up front, lacking a top quality striker. Bio up front is not the answer. Chak Batadze is one of the best chance creators in the whole league, but the centre forward situation needs resolving in January.
Yeah, strikers are always worth the weight in gold, aren't they? Just a quick word as well on Rob Edwards, because we had a situation like we mentioned with Gary O'Neill earlier, where it was almost like he was going to get knighted if the Luton fans had their way over the last couple of seasons, and then they were getting a bit of criticism the other week for it. Just maybe potentially got to stick with it and ride through this.
I don't see why not. I mean, he should have a lot of credit in the bank. They were never expected to even get in the, maybe even finish in the top half the season they went up, and they've gone in the playoffs and gone up. I mean, what he's done for the club there, as I mentioned, they've been looking to go into this new stadium for the funding for it for a long time, and he's basically paid for that by this incredible promotion. And they competed pretty well in the Premier League as well, more than many people expected. So they're having the first kind of rocky little period under him now. Expectations have probably gone too high. As I mentioned, that a lot of that investment is going into the ground rather than the team. He needs to be given a bit of time.
So those of you that aren't familiar with the Luton-Watford derby, it's worth watching. 12:30 on Saturday for that clash at Kenilworth Road. Up next, we'll go to Dan for his EFL selections. Normally, you've got 3 picks for us, Dan, across the EFL, and where are we starting this week?
Yep, going to sort of start off in League One with beleaguered Reading, I suppose you would say. I fancy them to win at home to Crawley. They're off-field issues, Reading. Just there seems to be something coming up almost every week. In the international break, they've been hit with a transfer embargo for January, but they tend to just carry on the squad there. Ruben Sellers doing an excellent job there. They've been strong, especially at home. 4 wins out of 5 at home. Away from home at the start of the season, got a draw away to Birmingham, who are an outstanding team at the level, and they're shade of odds on at home to Crawley, who are struggling really at the new level. Lost 7 of their 10 games. Rob Elliott's come in for Scott Lindsay, who did a great job for them as manager, but they lost a big game last week, 5-3 at home to like promotion rivals Shrewsbury, and they've got two key players, Jay Williams and Josh Flint, suspended. So Reading to win this game at home. Following on the second one, going to drop into League Two. Accrington draw no bet at home to Barrow. League Two is such a tight league, not a lot of difference between the teams at the top and the bottom. We saw that last week when Accrington went and won at 2-1 at Gillingham. It was a deserved victory for Accrington. Their second in a row after they got off to a poor start to the season. I think they'll start to kick on now. Accrington, not a bad side, and at home to Barrow, who are kind of they started well and they're starting to go the other way. They lost 1-0 at home to Morecambe, who were bottom of the league going into that game last weekend. Got quite a few injuries as well. Barry Niall Canavan, the captain, and Paul Farman, the goalkeeper, are still out at the moment. So Accrington, draw no bet odds against is a good bet there. Finally, going to finish off with League Two again. Colchester at home to Cheltenham, at shade of odds on. Cheltenham had too many draws, but they got 8 points from 5 at home. I still think they're going to be pushing up towards the playoff area under Danny Cowley, and I think they'll win this one. Cheltenham really struggling at the moment. 7 losses in 11 since being relegated from League One. Had a great opportunity last week home to Swindon, who had only won 1 game. They lost the game 3-2. A lot of discontent, I think, down there at Cheltenham at the moment, and I don't see them getting anything at Colchester.
Okay, so just a reminder of Dan's EFL selections for this weekend. We've got Reading, we've got Draw No Bet for Accrington Stanley, and we've got Colchester. So that is the EFL wrapped up for now. We're going to turn our attentions back to Mark's best bets. So, Mark, we'll begin with the bet builder. 3 legs as usual. And which game firstly are we looking at this week?
We're going to the Vitality for Bournemouth against Arsenal. I'm going to go for Arsenal -1 on the handicap. I just think the way that Bournemouth play, and they're not going to be shy in sort of stepping onto Arsenal, really will suit the way that the Gunners want to play. They're a massive threat at set pieces as well. And I just see Arsenal sort of winning the game, and rather than just taking them at 4-6 to win, let's try and have some fun with it and see if they can get that sort of second goal or maybe third one as well. And then following on from that, a couple of players to have over 1.5 shots. So Kai Havertz, 16 shots in his last 3 games, seems to be like loving life up front for Arsenal. Sort of, he plays in part of the team in terms of the general play, but he's also getting on the end of sort of crosses and stuff like that now. And I know that Saka sort of missed that second England game, but I'm going to go for him to have over 1.5 shots. Of course, if he doesn't play, it'll just turn into a double on Arsenal -1 and Kai Havertz to have over 1.5 shots. But Saka also had 16 shots in his last 3 games for Arsenal. So, between those two sort of forward-thinking players for Arsenal, shot volume is really high at the moment. And I'm not sure Bournemouth are perfectly suited to protect themselves either.
So that's Mark's thoughts then on the bet builder this week from the late game on Saturday, which is a reminder is Bournemouth against Arsenal. Time for the prop shop now, Mark. What are we looking here?
Yeah, I'm going for Erling Haaland to have over 1.5 shots on target at 4-6. Now, I don't know if you've heard about him, Warren, but he's quite a good forward. But normally these players will be priced up sort of unattractive, I think, because quite often you don't get both sides of the market, and you're only going to see one-way business. But I was surprised by the 4-6. I mean, Wolves are not very good defensively. They lost Kilman. Conceded 5 against Brentford last time out. I'm not sure how they protect themselves. And then I looked at Erling Haaland's recent matches. In his last 9 appearances, he's had over 1.5 shots on target in 8 of those. And then I looked back even further at sort of Erling Haaland and the home and away split to try to put me off the bet, really. So Erling Haaland has played in 17 away games in the last 12 months. And in 14 of those for Manchester City, he's had over 1.5 shots on target. So, I'm sort of, always worried when a bet looks too good to be true. But I certainly think that there's a strong case to say that Haaland over 1.5 shots on target should be shorter than 4-6.
I would fully agree with that. That's Mark's prop shop then for this week. We'll try and find you an assist treble winner now for this week's matches. And Dan, we'll start with your selection.
Yeah, I'll start off with I'll go with Reading at home to Crawley. I think Reading, as I mentioned before, very, very strong at home. Beat Huddersfield 2-1 in the last home game. I think Crawley is a much easier task. As I mentioned, a couple of suspensions for Crawley. Lost each of their last 6 games, so Reading to win this one. I
think you're looking at the Premier League, aren't you, Mark?
Yeah, I'm going for Arsenal to win at Bournemouth. The big 3 won at Bournemouth last season. So did Tottenham. Chelsea have already won there this term as well. So I like Bournemouth as a side, but I just think that when they come up against the best and try to outplay them, it doesn't work out too well for them.
Okay, well, I'm going to go into League 2 and I'm going to tip up Crewe to beat Salford. They're around about 5-4, 13-10 at the moment, and I'm surprised there were odds against. They've only lost 1 of the last 8 in the league, and they've got 4 points from the last 2 games, which were against top 6 teams in Doncaster and Gillingham. For Salford, they've only won 1 in the last 5, and they've not won on the road this season, and by all accounts, have not played particularly well in the last 2 or 3 weeks as well. So I think Crewe will be too good for Salford. So just to remind you, the Assist Treble is Reading, Arsenal and Crewe this weekend. And we'll conclude this week's show with the naps from both Mark and Dan. And Mark, we'll start with your nap.
Going for, have to wait till Monday night, Warren, but Nottingham Forest to beat Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace had a very slow start, looked at their expected goals. They've only actually won one game on XG so far this season. That was the 2-2 at home to Leicester, which was, a poor result for them. I think it's okay that they lost to Liverpool before the international break. That's probably going to happen. I think it's much harder to explain kind of the defeat at Everton. I thought they were poor at Brentford when they lost at home to West Ham as well, who haven't started the season brilliantly. And Nottingham Forest just look like a sort of really solid side at the moment. Milinkovic and Murillo, the two centre-backs, are sort of catching the eye, and they've got the forward players to hurt Palace as well. So, yeah, I'm all over the tricky trees.
Okay, so Nottingham Forest for Mark. Who are you going with, Dan, as your nap?
I'll go with Colchester in League Two at home to Cheltenham. At the moment, these two teams, you've got Colchester 17th and Cheltenham 21st, but I do feel they're going in different directions. I expect Colchester to be pushing up towards the playoffs, and Cheltenham, I think, could be at risk of another relegation. Colchester, drawn a lot of games, but they're unbeaten in the last 4 at home. Cheltenham lost 3 of the last 4. Mentioned that defeat 3-2 at home to Swindon last weekend. I think they'll lose again here. Colchester to win.
Well, my thanks to both Dan and Mark for their input again this week on the Assist. Don't forget, of course, to like, subscribe and comment. And if you're a golf fan, well, make sure you watch The Sweet Spot with Steve Palmer every Tuesday on the Racing Post YouTube channel. He had a 50-1 winner last week. Hopefully more success this time around. And we'll be back as well on Monday for a Champions League special Assist. But until then, enjoy your football this weekend. And please remember to gamble responsibly.